And joining us now with more on the Diaspora Index, it's Tziona Koenig-Yair, Director General of the Diaspora Affairs Ministry. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So, are the findings in the index surprising to you at all? And, have you seen a change from previous years?
The findings in the index are actually quite stable over the last 4 or 5 years. There has been a decrease in the index, so there has been more of a concern about taking care of what's happening in Israel, partially due to COVID-19 and what's happening, with the global pandemic, and people wanting to, I think, as we say in Hebrew, aniyei ircha kodmim, taking care of those who are closer to home at this point. Having said that, it has been quite stable over the last 5 years, and the data that you brought forth at the beginning of the interview is similar to what we've seen over the past few years.
And so why is the connection or sense of kinship between Israelis and diaspora Jews weakened in recent years?
So I think it's due to a number of parameters. I think the first thing is that we're in a totally different situation here in Israel than we were in the past, right? It's a stable, independent country. It's not the same situation we had when Israel was first established, right? 70 years ago, we were very dependent on diaspora Jews, not only financially, but for moral support, for ideals, for the values that were, everything put onto the state of Israel and the establishment of an independent state, a nation state for the Jewish people. So that's the first piece of that. And that paradigm is changing. It's shifting. And as we become a more independent state, I think that communities, Jewish communities around the world, feel that they have a stake in the country, but they don't necessarily agree with everything happening in the state of Israel, but they want their voice to be heard. And then there's really a difference of opinion, and not all Israelis think the same around this, about what that stake of diaspora or global Jewry is here in Israel. How much validity do we give to that voice of Jewish communities around the world? And there are many examples of this, and I think that brings with it a little bit of tension.
And speaking of
that's one. Yeah.
Speaking of this validity, is Israel doing enough to strengthen the ties with the diaspora?
So obviously in this position, and since I've assumed this role, I would argue that not. On the one hand, the state of Israel has shown its commitment by establishing a ministry, and the prime minister today was the former minister of this ministry, has shown his commitment to world Jewry over and over again. Having said that, I do not think that we are working enough internally in Israeli society to raise awareness to the importance of a global Jewish community, to the importance of us not only being Israelis, but also being citizens in that global Jewish community. And I think that is something that we need to work harder on. And when I say we, I mean Israeli society, not necessarily only the government of Israel.
And that actually leads me to my next question, because we do often hear that we're, losing diaspora Jewry, so to speak, that they're no longer automatically pro-Israel, that many are losing their connection to Israel, to Judaism. But, what about the Israeli side that doesn't feel a strong commitment or connection to diaspora Jews? What needs to be done here in Israel?
I think we need to be doing 3 things, right? We need to be increasing knowledge. So people need to have knowledge about what it means to be part of a Jewish community. I think that in this recent war, we're very visual and we're very connected to what's happening in the Ukraine, and we see the Ukrainian Jewish community. But on a day-to-day basis, when we're not in a crisis, I think it's very hard for the average Israeli to come across information, knowledge, facts about what's happening with Jewish communities worldwide. We're talking about 50% of the Jewish world being dispersed around the globe. What do we know about the community in Melbourne, Australia? What do we know about a community in Buenos Aires? Not much. So I think the first thing is knowledge, to your question. The second is working with that knowledge to deepen connections. And that we do on a personal level. We're wonderful in Israel about bringing global Jewry to Israel, bringing Jews from around the world to Israel to get to know Israel and to foster that important connection with this land, with our state. I think that we need to be doing the same thing for Israelis to the diaspora.
Absolutely. I agree, and hopefully we'll be able to strengthen ties, strengthen the bond between Israel and the diaspora. Tziona Koenig-Yair, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at iltv.tv and watch from any device.